Well, welcome to the Daily Brief on Metro Milwaukee's health and the economy, brought to you by the Medical College of Wisconsin and the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. My name is Tim Sheehy. I'm president of the MMAC, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. John Raymond, president of the Medical College. Each day at 3:30, we deliver a 19-minute fact-filled update on the health and economic impact of COVID-19. This webcast is powered by Aurora WDC. Our special guest today is Mike Lovell, president of Marquette University, a great talent asset for this community and an economic driver. And we'll hear more from Dr. Lovell about the impact of higher education in the new normal. But now let's turn to Dr. Raymond for an update on our health situation.
Thanks, Tim, and good afternoon. And before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that today is National Nurses Day, so please thank a nurse. And because Mike Lovell's our guest, I want to especially say thank you to his nursing faculty. As we all know, nurses are essential healthcare providers who truly are on the front lines of fighting the pandemic. So we'll go on to our report card here. This first slide summarizes various indicators of COVID-19, and I'll run through these quickly. The doubling time for COVID-19 has continued to stretch out to 13.7 days in Wisconsin and 19.1 days in Milwaukee. The daily growth rates over the last 7 days are stable at 4.5% in Wisconsin and 3% in Milwaukee. There were 335 positive tests in Wisconsin today, with 108 of those in Brown County and 116 in Milwaukee. The percent positive rate was 8% in Wisconsin and 16% in Milwaukee. The testing capacity increased by nearly 3,500 to 14,800 today in Wisconsin. ICU and ventilator capacity are stable, and they're also adequate in Wisconsin. And the PPE trends are improving to stable in both Wisconsin and Milwaukee, with notable improvements in the supply of goggles. Next slide, please. I just wanted to touch briefly on areas that will require special attention for managing COVID-19, especially as we begin to reopen our economy through a smart restart. We'd be well advised to focus on educating our employees, consumers, and vulnerable populations, deploying both diagnostic and serological tests in vulnerable communities, and enhancing public health resources across the board. So vulnerable populations include ethnic minority populations at risk, such as African American, Latino and Hispanic, Native American, and Asian Hmong populations. Homeless, undocumented, high-density work environments such as food processing plants, nursing homes and group living situations, and the incarcerated. I'm encouraged by recent interventions focused on nursing homes and food processing plants. This is good and essential progress. And as we move from crisis mitigation to a smart restart of our economy, we must address the underlying social issues associated with the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities of color. It's the right thing to do, and I believe it's also the smart thing to do. It's in the best interest of our communities and the vitality of our region to address the underlying social issues that lead to health disparities. Next slide, please. This final slide shows two What to Watch Wednesday innovations. First is an invention called Zermasol, created by a student at the University of Technology of Jamaica. This device generates ultraviolet light in the UVC spectrum, which can kill viruses on touch surfaces like door handles. Now, the second gadget is called FaceFence. FaceFence is a small motion detector that can be worn on your wrist or on the front of shirt or blouse. The device emits a short warning beep if your hands move too close to your face. The device also emits a long warning buzz if someone enters your personal space bubble, so it could be used as a social distancing tool. Now, I'm not certain that FaceFence could survive Shark Tank level scrutiny, but it is trending on social media today. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Tim.
Thank you, Dr. Raymond. I think I need a shock collar to stop touching my face, but that might be a start. Let's bring Dr. Lovell in here and talk a little bit about the impact that Marquette has on the community, both in terms of generating talent we need, but also as an economic driver. And as we were talking earlier, Mike, you're in an uncharted set of waters in terms of how Marquette and higher education institutions are running. Why don't you take us through that?
Yeah, and maybe a good place to start would be that before the COVID-19 crisis, we were in a period where headwinds were really coming against higher education in many ways in terms of how much higher ed cost, the type of education we're delivering, whether it was relevant. We knew that student debt was becoming a national crisis. And so we had a lot of challenges to begin with, and we were facing a lot of pressures. And this coming kind of quite a surprise to all of us has really put higher ed in a precarious situation because we have so many uncertainties looking forward, particularly over the next year. Next slide, please. So when you think about the COVID-19 crisis, I like to put it in 3 phases for higher education. And I do want to point out, this is not necessarily all unique to Marquette. Every university in the country are facing similar challenges. And essentially, we had our students go away for spring break when really the pandemic hit, and we were not able to bring them back to campus. So we, in a very short period of time, had to transition to a remote learning environment, which is a complete disruption of our industry. And that brought about what I would say phase 2 is how are we going to fill the short-term revenue shortfalls that brought about for us. So schools had to make some very tough decisions on how that would work. And finally, in phase 3, we're planning for what the next 12 to 18 months looks like, because quite frankly, like many people in the corporate sector, we're going to try to just survive and get through this and get to the other side and take advantage of ourselves position and maybe opportunities that may exist. Next slide. So to give you an idea, in mid-March, when this all hit, again, as I said before, our students were on spring break. We essentially had a week's period of time to move all of our courses to a remote learning environment. We decided not to bring our students back for all the concerns, which many of you know about. And I will just say it was absolutely amazing that we took all of our courses. We had only had about 50 or 75 that were taught online during the spring semester, to having more than 1,500 additional courses. And you can imagine that stress that caused on our entire infrastructure, both our IT, our online learning center, and all of our faculty, and then the students themselves who had to transition to a completely new learning environment. And I like to say it was really a Herculean task that we underwent. And I appreciate the patience of so many people involved, but really it was amazing that we were able to take all of our coursework and produce an online learning environment where our students can still complete their semesters. The other big challenge we had was actually how did we move everybody out of the residence halls? And so in a very short period of time, within 2 weeks of making this announcement, we moved all but about 28 students. We had a few students from international or otherwise had no place to go out of the residence halls. And so you can imagine the disruption over 2 weeks what this caused us to be going through. But again, like many universities, I'm very proud of the effort that people took place. And I often said that people were running on adrenaline for a long period of time. And I just really appreciate the effort it took. So next slide. So the other piece of this this immediate disruption caused us, again, all of us in higher education, not only do we generate revenue from tuition, but we also generate funds from room and board, research, and other things that also immediately had to go offline. And so for Marquette, we faced a $15 million shortfall for the second half of the semester, and the disruption this caused. And again, smaller schools, obviously had a smaller amount. Bigger schools like Madison had a larger amounts, but still in scale, we all had significant shortfalls we had to make up. And so this caused us to make some very challenging decisions on how we were going to make up that shortfall. But I just want to point out that this was a one-time gap that we are trying to get through the rest of the school year. Right now we have students during their finals to get through. And so we made some decisions around furloughing employees that no longer had work to do, or their work had gone away because the students weren't on campus. And that's some other decisions. So we were able to close that short-term gap. Next slide, please. I think what our bigger challenges that end up being is, what is the future look like, particularly coming this fall and throughout the next year, because they're really, we don't know some of the implications of COVID-19 and the coronavirus going forward. And some of the uncertainties we're operating with, we don't know what our summer enrollments are going to be, whether we can even have any students on campus, or can we continue to be all online. I think the bigger challenge is what's going to happen with freshman classes. 1 in 6 students that was thinking about graduating seniors going to higher ed is now reconsidering where they're going to go. We're hearing many students thinking about taking a gap year. We have a lot of students whose families want them to stay at home and maybe do a 2-year school. And so there's tremendous amount of uncertainty in terms of what enrollments will look like this coming fall, both in new freshmen and returning students. Another thing we need to think about is we know that many of their families have lost 25% of their savings. So we know we need to have more student aid and find ways to allow students to come back to school that want to come back. The other thing is we don't know how long we're going to have this remote learning environment. There's tremendous amount of uncertainties, even if they come back in the fall, what that'll look like, because we're going to have to change maybe the way we do residence hall or do classes. That'll change, but then again, the virus may come back in late November, December. We have to send people back home again. How do we start the spring semester? And also, consumer behavior is going to change. Now we've moved to an all online platform. Some people may want to continue on with having that going on in the future. So we're really trying to wrestle with, okay, what is education looking like going forward with all the changes that we've had to go through in recent times? And so as we do scenario planning, there's really a lot of things to consider. We need to look at the programming, the way we're structured as a university, some of the operational aspects. And so we have really a team of 100 experts on our campus called the COVID-19 response team that is really helping us think through and address some of the challenges and the scenarios that we may face. Because if we can't have classes the way we regularly do or residence halls, we just have to be prepared and ready for that come the fall.
Mike, a very helpful overview, and I think congratulations to Marquette on what looks to be a stunning pivot in a really challenging time. Two questions for you as I bring Dr. Raymond in. We'll get some questions from our viewers. Is one, a big part of the college experience is coming onto campus for the first time, living on your own, meeting other students. So do you see that how do you see recovering that?
Yeah. So first of all, I will say that as I talk to students and even incoming freshmen, there is just a really strong desire for them to be on the campus, be with each other. College is a very social experience. You learn as much out of the classroom about yourself and about life as you learn in the classroom. And so we're really doing our best. We announced a little over a week ago that we're expecting to have students back in the fall, but we also have to put in mitigating circumstances so that they're safe. And we know that unfortunately sometimes 18 to 22-year-olds behaviors, they don't always think logically. So we're going to have to make sure we have safeguards up for them in terms of testing and tracking and personal protective devices to help keep them safe. But truly what you're mentioning is we understand and we know that the student experience is much more than just what they learn in the classroom. So as we think about certainly the next year, we know we have some challenges we're going to be facing. And again, the team that is looking at our COVID-19 response is really thinking through. Student affairs becomes a very important part of those discussion and those items.
So to the extent anything's permanent in this environment, if you had to identify one of the changes that you think is going to be permanent from this COVID crisis on college campuses, what would you say?
Well, I think the digital transformation that we were forced to go through, we'd been talking about, this transformation that was coming at us, and we knew we were planning for it. Now it's going to be a part of our natural reality. I think that students, whether they're in high school now or even younger, they've already gone through this transition and they're learning in a new way, and we know it's possible. Our faculty and staff now know that they can teach in this format. And so now it's a matter of, how do we blend that great in-class experience, because again, one thing that we know is that the ultimate learning environment is when you have a faculty member not only teaching a student, but being also a mentor, teaching them leadership and helping them with life decisions. So how do we blend kind of that in-person experience, which we're very proud of at Marquette, with this new digital format, which we know students are going to be much more adept at learning at. And so I think, even if we think about ways that we teach, we can have large lecture, in a bigger environment digitally, than have smaller discussion sections, for example, going forward in the future. So I think that's just, one way I think we're going to see what we've just gone through change over a longer period of time, the way higher ed operates. And I think it's been coming. It's just now it got accelerated because of COVID-19.
Yeah. Chris, let's go to some questions from the audience.
Yeah, first question for you, Dr. Lovell, is, and you may not know this yet, but what is your timeline for some of these difficult decisions you've outlined, given the constituents you have to serve, and you're probably asking them for some flexibility as well?
Yeah, so essentially we have to rely on both the healthcare experts and the government agencies to give us the guidelines and parameters for what we do. And I have, I talk to my president colleagues several times a week, actually, in different groups. And one thing we've been told is the CDC is most likely going to come up with some guidelines around returning to a classroom and also into residence halls. And so we're hoping that those guidelines would come out no later than July 1st, so that we would start preparing what that may look like. And again, the answers, we're not going to develop the answers ourselves. We're actually going to, let the experts determine that for us, and then we would use our creativity and our expertise to implement the guidelines that are given to us.
Another question for Dr. Lovell. What has been one good surprise that you've seen from your environment throughout this whole ordeal?
Well, I tell you one thing. Well, there's really two things. One is I've seen how resilient our students are. We think what we ask them to do, to go, go every spring break and come back, and the money they get back, they're at home with their families, and we've asked them, to truly transform the way they've learned. I will just say that our faculty, as I've talked to them, are very proud of the performance of our students in this new environment. And I think the second thing is, I still have virtual coffee with students several times a month. And what I'm hearing from them is that they're not going to ever take anything for granted about being on campus and being with their friends and being in some of the buildings and some of the things they get to do when they're on campus. And so they tell me that those things were something that they quite frankly they didn't think twice about, and now they're really missing them, and they're not going to ever think that these things are something that they don't want to have in their lives going forward.
Another question that may be good for all three of you, because it's something we've been talking about for a while now, but how do you give people confidence to go out and resume some semblance of normal activities under different circumstances when we're still seeing media reports of tests rising and other things that may frighten people?
I think that's what the Smart Restart's all about. It's individual and employer responsibility and consumer-facing responsibility as well.
Mike?
Well, I think, one of the things that's really important is, as we look forward, is, our own behaviors and having everybody responsible, to behave in appropriate ways and know that we have to look out for the best interests of our broader communities.
Yeah, Mike, one of the questions I've gotten actually from other parents is as freshmen are coming in, they're usually take a placement test, or they're starting to do that. Of course, all the places they take placement tests are closed. And until you get the placement test taken, it's hard to register for your class schedule. How's that going to work out?
So again, we need to transform those types of things, to an online format. And so now our orientation for the summer is now completely online, and those orientations, include, placement tests that they would have to do in, a digital online format. And so again, it's part of the process we're going through. And, I guess, and one of the biggest challenges, I do think that incoming freshmen face is many incoming seniors, as they're thinking about making their decision, they haven't been able to visit the campuses that they're trying to choose between. And how do you choose where to go in the fall if you've not visited the schools you're trying to make a decision about?
Really good point.
Mike, one question about the 100-member COVID-19 team you put together. Do students get an input on some of these decisions?
Well, first of all, there's 5 working teams that are led by different individuals on campus around our COVID-19 response team. And yes, students do have an input. There are student representatives on some of the teams where it makes the most sense for them to have input on. And so again, most of what they discuss, though, really is around the safety and well-being of the entire campus community, and not that the students shouldn't have input on the way things work. But I think, again, most of the people on that group are experts in their different fields.
Mike, maybe one last question. I know you and your wife are very involved in trauma and those issues. What has this experience been taught you, or maybe what is going to be one of the main takeaways from this whole experience in terms of trauma?
Well, I think what this has shown, which we've known about, but is highlighted, very extensively, is the disparities that exist within our city, and whether it be access to healthcare, whether it be access to personal protective equipment, whether it be access to other resources. We know that the inner city, particular African American community, has been the hardest hit by this. And so as we think about systems going forward, and what we need to do as a city is ensure that individuals in some of our more disparate areas have access to the resources they need for their health and well-being, whether that be their physical health around COVID-19 or their mental health around trauma. And so it just really motivates both of us to work even harder and try to make the playing field a little more even for everyone.
Well, Dr. Lovell, Dr. Raymond, thank you again. We're lucky to have 2 exceptional leaders of our educational institutions here in the Milwaukee area, and really appreciate what you've done. Tomorrow, we're going to hear from Dr. Raymond on an updated set of data that we'll be looking at. And then we also have Kathy Jacobson, the president of Froedtert Hospitals, joining us. So we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Have a safe rest of your afternoon. And again, Dr. Raymond, Dr. Lovell, thank you for joining.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, John.